Hi there. I'm Mike Gonzalez with Green Vigilante Media, and I'm very excited with our interview today. We're interviewing Ian Schlakman, who is running to be the Green Party presidential candidate from Baltimore, Maryland. Ian was educated on the subject of political science. He's an entrepreneur and has been a Green Party candidate for city council and governor. Thank you, Ian, for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Michael. I really appreciate it. One small correction though, it's Ian.
Oh, Ian. Okay.
Yeah, Ian. Yeah.
Ian. So I want to get started on your platform right away. Something that I think you focused on is universal basic income, and it's a
Sure.
key issue that you're running on. You helped found and operate a nonprofit, Basic Income Action. What's the goal of this organization?
Sure. Well, basic income is a fantastic idea that's been around since Martin Luther King basically talked about it in his books. And I think that its time has come. Essentially, it means giving a universal certain amount of money, enough to pay bills and rent. So we like to think of that as at least $1,000, maybe more, per month to every individual in the U.S., to every citizen, essentially. So it's sort of like Social Security, but Social Security for everyone. When you turn 18, you get a universal basic income, and there'd be some sort of child benefit as well that would go to the parents. It's really important because this sort of benefit could abolish poverty tomorrow. And we were to do something very similar in terms of Social Security. We want to make sure that every single person gets that, especially people with children and families starting out of their career. I mean, there's so many different reasons to have it. And one of the reasons I came to a basic income was because I do a lot of work I'm a member of the National Welfare Rights Organization, National Welfare Rights Union. And, you know, for a really long time, I think that it's not really well known, but welfare recipients have been advocating that they know how to spend the money the best. Poor people specifically know how to spend money better than anyone else. I mean, if you've ever gone to Baltimore's public housing projects and see the way people can stretch a dollar, you'd be really surprised. So I think that if you gave everyone a universal basic income, you could abolish poverty tomorrow. And on top of that, it would be the best sort of benefit or a type of social service that you could give out there. Because when you do the social services that we have now, which are all means tested, you know, you run into this very negative dilemma, I think they call it, where basically the more income that you make privately, the less income that you can get from social services. So you have this, a negative incentive to not get either social services or to start working privately. And we all know if you're having trouble finding a job, you're going to find odd jobs. You're going to Uber. You're going to, do Lyft or something like that. You're not going to automatically start making a full-time job right away unless you're really lucky. So I think the time has come to really think about basic income in terms of a way to once and for all eliminate poverty. And that's why we started this organization. There's a lot of folks that I work with over at US Big, which is a basic income think tank, which likes to talk about big ideas for basic income, how to fund it, look at the Alaska model, look at models in Finland, talk about different ways to do it. And there are a bunch of economists and professors and sociologists talk about this. And Basic Income Action is the advocacy group. We talk about actually getting on the ground, handing out flyers, talking to people on the street, doing interviews with people. What would you do if you had $1,000 a month? How would it change your life? How would things be better for you? That kind of thing. We want to get people really talking about this idea because we think it's one of the most important policies that we could implement, in the next 10, 20 years.
Excellent. And for people who don't know, can you tell them what's happening in Alaska right now?
Oh, sure, yeah. Alaska has what's called a permanent dividend fund, which basically means that the money that they get from the oil industry goes into a fund that goes directly to the taxpayers. And Alaska is a very, very conservative state. I don't even want to say Republican. I want to say more conservative. So when you start talking to people about who should spend your money the best, should it be bureaucrats in Washington? Should it be someone in a state office? Or should it be the people that actually have the families who're going to benefit from the money? I think universally, if you're consider yourself on the left or the right, people would say, no, I would know how to spend my own money the best, and I would want my own money. So I think that this idea sort of has cross appeal between people that consider themselves conservative, people that consider themselves on the left. And, you know, I think whether you're a socialist or a progressive or a libertarian, it's something that we could all kind of agree on. That's why I think it's one of the few policies that we can get done right away through Congress if we actually had Greens in Congress and in the White House.
And so are you for a full basic income or a partial basic income?
That's a great question. So essentially, the way I see it is the federal government would give out something close to around $1,000 a month. And that would be the basic income floor, so to speak. And then I think we would have to push out, make the recommendation to states and localities that they should also be supplementing with their own version of a basic income. Baltimore City has one of the highest rents in the country, despite being a pretty impoverished area, to be frank with you. They should be giving out a basic income if you live in Baltimore City. You know, DC, New York would have to settle with their own amount of money. You know, different states can come in with their own amount. And I think this should be the new way that we tackle poverty, because the goal, we have to keep the goal in mind. I'm really big into this idea that we have to be a goal-oriented society, a goal-oriented people. Is the goal to abolish poverty? If the answer is yes, which I think we all would agree, we can't just sit around and say, more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. And that's the Trump administration's answer to everything. More jobs, more jobs, more jobs. That is not the right way to accomplish abolishing poverty. I think it's very clear. Martin Luther King talked about this all the way back in the 60s, and today it's still relevant, and we're still talking about it all the time. Basic income would actually give money into the people's pockets that need it the most and make sure that it's abolished once and for all poverty. And the reason we say universal too, I want to touch on that, is because I don't think you ever quite know someone's economic state this day and age. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too personal, but essentially my family growing up, my father had a fantastic income, and then one day it was gone. And, you know, my wife's story is actually very, very similar to that. And sometimes you recover. I'm sorry about that. Sometimes you recover. Sometimes, you know, financially, you know, you do find another job, and sometimes you'll never find that job again, and you'll find yourself in a totally different career, or maybe you're done with your career preemptively early. I mean, you know, I'm not too into the automation theory of basic income. I do believe that, you know, we are automating away a lot of jobs, but I am a socialist, and I do know that the capitalists that run our businesses would always seek that way to automate every single job possible. So, I mean, it's really important for us to understand that capitalists and businesses don't owe us a job, and they don't owe us, you know, we fight for a fair wage. They're never going to just hand over a fair wage. So it's really important for us to start thinking in terms that make a little more economic sense for us. You know, having a guaranteed basic income in our pockets would make a lot more sense, you know, I think, than some of the policies we currently have for alleviating poverty.
So what you touched on was something I think that the libertarian view is that with automation and artificial intelligence, there's going to be less work to do. So it's going to take maybe less hours for us. And is that correct, that's why they advocate for a universal basic income?
I think the libertarian point of view is that they don't like social services. And so if the government's going to collect taxes, they want it to go right back into people's pockets rather than be this like long list of tests. I mean, some of these tests that they have for getting social services now are just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you have someone living with you that happens to get a job, that could cancel your benefits for social services. If someone, this is not a joke, in Baltimore, I think it's across the country now, if you're smoking, if someone smokes in your public housing, like someone just comes in, lights up a cigarette and leave, they do a test on your wall to see if there's nicotine stains on it, you're out. I mean, it's really kind of ridiculous, and it's quite frankly just really punitive. I mean, it's just not there to help people, it's there to punish them, constantly punish them into this mindset. I kind of get that point of view, I do. you'd be surprised how many social service workers are actually a part of national welfare rights, or even part of basic income action, who know how broken our social service network is. I mean, did you know a large portion of our social services actually go to churches that put up billboards that say marriages between a man and a woman, get married today to save money? I mean, that is something that the government actually calls social services and hands over to churches. That's sort of ridiculous. I think, universally left and right, we can agree that's a complete waste of money. But what I'm thinking about is, from a socialist perspective, we have a shrinking unionized working class. Every day it grows smaller and smaller and smaller. I think we might want to reorganize around calling for a basic income guarantee, in addition to the $15 an hour and a union demands that we're already calling for. Because as they shut down factory after factory, like right here in Baltimore, they're shutting down a GM plant. I mean, those jobs are gone, and there's not really a call for what to do after that factory closes. We're calling for that factory to be nationalized, because we know that as citizens, as voting citizens, our best shot of opening up that factory would be using the government. Because sitting there and asking GM to open it back up and then give us decent wages and then give us a union, I don't think that's a good use of our time. So I want to redo the way that we think about some of these, some of the demands we put out there. And I think basic income has to be part of that list of demands.
So you touched on this also with the $15 minimum wage. Are things like healthcare for all, free college tuition, and living wage jobs kind of a road to universal basic income, or how do they relate to it?
Sort of. I mean, I testified in Annapolis for $15 an hour minimum wage. I think it'd be every, I'm a business owner. Every person we pay makes $15 an hour minimum wage, at least. And then on top of that, everyone on our campaign makes $15 plus. So, I mean, that's just really important. To pay something in poverty wages is, I don't know if you can sleep at night if you're doing something like that. But I do think it's important that we understand it. I'm a socialist, and one of the reasons I really wanted to run with the Green Party is because I see that the Democrats are taking a lot of the socialist space up. Right now, they're kind of bringing socialists into that party. And I think that if we in the Green Party don't make it clear that we are the true anti-capitalist party, we're the true socialist party, here's our socialist vision, that we're not really going to get very far. So that's sort of my vision to all of this. So, I mean, of course, I think fighting $15 an hour is really important. I think unionizing is really important. But I also think that having those demands, you can't just have demands for certain times. You have to have a list of demands that you can make no matter who's in office. Right now, there's I'll give you an example. So in Maryland, there was a fight statewide to bring $15 an hour around, and that bill never went anywhere. So they took it down to Baltimore City, and Baltimore City was supposed to have a $15 an hour vote, and the vote wound up failing, and they were going to have another vote. The mayor vetoed $15 an hour minimum wage. They were going to have a veto override vote, and then they played some dirty tricks in the back room, never got the veto override vote. And meanwhile, the mayor also campaigned on $15 an hour minimum wage, got union endorsement based on her pledge to support $15 an hour minimum wage.
Wow.
So what did they do? They didn't do another vote in Baltimore to save face for the mayor, who was facing heat from progressives. They brought it back up to the state level and decided to, let the mayor just ride out. And, I personally, I think that we've got to have demands at every single level of government. I know we're in an age right now of, Trump is, rightfully so, a horrible, monstrous, like cartoonishly bad president. But, I also think that if we don't go back to the local level and say, okay, Trump's in power on top, but that doesn't give you the right to not give us $15 an hour minimum wage below, or, move on this progressive legislation you said you're going to do. So in my opinion, basic income and also like demands for more public housing, demands for Medicare for all, all these demands have to be kept at the front and center of our movement, because you never know what you're going to have to be demanding for that day. Because they're going to do stuff, they're going to move stuff around for you. They're going to make statements like, oh, Trump's never going to give us this, so then we got to go to the state level. We got to go to the city level. We have to continue the pressure campaign. We can't let the movement die out. We can't let the movement just wash away because we have to say, oh, well, the Republicans are in power now. We'll just quit it for a year and come back when the Democrats are in power. Like that's just not the right way to go about this. It's about raising class consciousness. And that means showing folks what demands that they can make in their local area, all the way up to the top, to the presidency.
Excellent. And this is one of my least favorite questions, but I know I have to ask it. How do we finance it?
Oh, the basic income.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're the first person to actually ask me that. That's great. Essentially, there have been a couple of different ways that we have talked about to finance it. One would be, you look at the Alaska Permanent Fund, and essentially they're financing it off of oil. I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, I want to make this really clear, though.
The oil industry, which we're trying to get away from, right?
Yeah. Even though it's better than them just taking the profits for themselves, at least we're tapping into the profits. I don't think that's the right way to go. I do think there are certain taxes that you could levy that you could easily get a basic income from. So one of the things that we're calling for is that the U.S. spends a disproportionately large amount of money on the military, just an insane amount of money on the military. So shutting down military bases worldwide, bringing troops home back to the U.S., keeping our ships and air power local in the country here would enormously reduce not just the amount of money we're spending on the military, but it would also cut down on on greenhouse gas emissions, because all those ships, all those tankers, all those planes especially, produce a massive amount of carbon. So this is a major issue that we could look at it from two different ways. Not only would it help reduce climate change, but it would also help save us a ton of money, which could then be used for programs like a basic income. I do think that, and this comes from working in the basic income community and talking to social workers that are in the know about this, so much of our designated social services budget goes to waste. I mean, for example, the program I talked about before, the churches are getting social service money, not just for the churches get social service money, religious institutions get social service money, not just for billboards that claim you should be married, which is obviously their perspective as as a conservative religious institution, but also for running their own like mini social services that only certain people can get because you only go to their church or something like that. The enormous amount of waste in the social service community is rampant, and it's a real problem that we have to talk about. So I do think that there are ways to take a lot of that money and put it into a basic income. And then the final thing that I would do is, and I ran in 2014 on this when I ran for Congress, would be to actually use Social Security to do Social Security for all. So we increase the Social Security fund. And the way they're talking about expanding it now, I would go further and expand it all the way down to 18. Fill that account with as much money as possible. We have to increase taxes on the wealthy. Absolutely. I mean, I think this has become a universally accepted conclusion. We've had taxes on the wealthy that were far higher, into the 90%, in the early 1900s, and nowadays they're just abysmally low, and it's so easy for businesses to hide money. They're never paying any taxes at all. Know about Amazon or even Trump's companies. It's absolutely insane. So there's different ways to capture that money and bring it back in. And then I would be for putting it in something like the Social Security lockbox, or it should be a lockbox, and making sure it can't be touched. And it's a fund that's kept for years and years and years.
Yeah, that's very important. Agreed. So Ian, are you going to run on the Green New Deal like Jill Stein did in 2012 and 2016?
Well, I mean, I think So I mean, the answer to your question is yes. I mean, the Green New Deal is really, really important. I have, worked with Jill for a little while. I think her constantly touting and talking about the Green New Deal was really important. I think it inspired folks that think about those, days back of FDR's time, where he talked about this New Deal and had this program introduced that really lifted millions out of poverty. And I've also talked to Howie Hawkins about it as well. He calls us, he's the Green New Dealer, as he likes to say. A fantastic amount of history there. Really interesting program that he pitched. I think it was like 15 years ago. So, I mean, I think it's something that the Green Party has to keep front and center. And I do think we have to keep reminding folks that I'm really into giving credit where credit is due. That's why I take the time to mention other people, like Howie, because it not just as a Green, but as someone who's
Ian,
a lover of history. Go ahead.
you hold on one moment. Are you there?
Yeah.
Sorry, our internet broke up. Can you just repeat for the last couple of minutes that you were speaking, what you were saying?
Oh, sure. I was just saying that, did you get what I said about Howie?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So
You
would.
you
Yeah.
were saying that you like to give other people credit, and you wanted to make.
Yeah. It's really important to me to give credit where credit is due, because it's not just about me being a Green and wanting the Green Party to get credit for a policy that it introduced and championed for years. But I also think it's important because we'll lose our sense of history if we think the Green New Deal just emerged one day in the Democratic Party. Like, that's just complete nonsense. And it sort of drives me nuts where you have activists in the Green Party side that are, going to their state capitals, going to DC, marching on Washington, marching in New York for climate change action, for Green New Deal action. And then all of a sudden the Democrats take it over and say, oh, no, it was our idea. We're not going to credit any Green Party person. And I've looked and I've looked and I've looked, and I have not seen, Congresswoman Cortez give any credit to the Green Party ever. I mean, it's one thing to say, I don't agree with their methods. It's another thing to say, erase us from history. And I think that, this to me, everyone that I work with, I try to make sure that they, erasing someone from history is sort of like the ultimate horrible thing that you could do to a group, a party, or even a person. For example, I worked with Reverend Annie Chambers. She was my running mate in 2018, just last year, for governor. Two Black Panthers. That's a woman. She had 25 children. Black Panther woman, was taught, learned under Malcolm X himself. And, a lot of other, folks don't give her credit. Don't put her in the history books. Never interview her. I mean, I'm just stunned at the self-serving nature of rewriting history to put those who get the limelight one day, like folks in the Democratic Party, and just never mention those folks that they're standing on the shoulders of. Who trained them, who was out there with them in the streets, who protested with them. I mean, it's just not. There's no way to build up the left, in my opinion, and I think it's something that we have to stand against. So, yeah, I mean, I think the resolution for the Green New Deal that's in Congress now is just that. It's a resolution. It's non-binding. It's just a list of things that are nice. I think Speaker Pelosi has clearly said that it's some sort of fictitious dream legislation that she doesn't think is going to go anywhere. And then, you have Congresswoman Cortez saying, oh, no, she meant that positively. It's a dreams are positive. I mean, that's just crazy. You've got to be at war with your own leadership. If we had someone in the Green Party that was saying horrible things, I would denounce them, because the climate change emergency is there. And it's really important that we tackle it right away. I don't care who's in leadership. I'm going to speak out against them because it's important to speak out against someone, or else we're not going to have a planet to live on. So I think that you're seeing that it's about fighting the establishment. It's about fighting the order that got us into this mess. And you're either going to be there to fight and be at war with the folks that are keeping you back, or you're going to, capitulate, give them what they want, and we're not really going to get any real accomplishment on climate change. And scientists give us 11 years left to avoid catastrophic climate change. So I'm going to be out there protesting no matter what, whether I'm running for president or whether I'm just some person out there, getting in front of the, getting on the protest line, marching and chanting in front of ExxonMobil or something like that.
Right. And do you think it's a success for the Green Party that the Green New Deal has been taken up by other parties and it's getting at least media attention?
I do. I really do. This was what's so weird about it. They could have, I think there are a lot of Democratic, progressive Democrats that don't care about the Green Party that could have easily have just said something else. They could have called it like the Democrat Dream Climate Bill or something, ridiculous like that. To go and take the Green New Deal and to put it into the limelight and then just ignore the people that originally came up with it and that have been promoting it for decades or at least 10, 20 years is just ludicrous. It really speaks to the sort of prevailing insanity in DC right now and in our mainstream media. You had Jill Stein out there talking about the Green New Deal, going on TV, going on the few places that would give her interviews, but she did get mainstream press talking about the Green New Deal and then openly mocking her, just for months when she ran her campaign, years after that. And now all of a sudden the Democrats touch it and they're like, well, maybe we'll give it a second look because the Democrats are touching it. Can we just focus on the science? Can we just get to the science, save our planet, and then we can talk about that kind of stuff later on? Can we just get this stuff done? Seriously, we have to play these ridiculous games about. I don't think this is any way to. When I look at this as one big problem, I think that the mainstream media, sort of ignoring it, and then taking a second look at it and still kind of mocking it is part and parcel of the problem of the Democratic Party, and it's part and parcel of the problem that they don't want to give credit to other political parties. I'm not, I like to keep a vision in mind of what a really functional America would look like. And for me, it's, multi-parties, socialists, even anarchists and libertarians, having a strong, independent party of the two major parties that we have right now. And when you have that many parties out there, 4, 5, 6, that's a real functional democracy. Building coalitions, talking to other folks that don't agree with you, actually getting stuff done. You've got two parties right now, run with moderates in them. And you know what they're getting done in DC? Nothing. And even when the Republicans were in charge, only they agreed on is just one tax cut bill. And when the Democrats were in charge, all they agreed on was some slight changes to our corporate medical system, and they called it Obamacare. This is just the way you have a functional, diverse, thriving democracy is through multi-parties that have to get out of their little office, walk down the hall, talk to people that they don't agree with, and come up with real legislation. And these are socialist ideas, anarchist ideas, pro-democratic ideas, Christian socialist ideas. I can go on list of different groups that are not getting recognition because they're not in the two major party system. And until we fix this problem, I think we're going to see we're not really going to make real change at that federal level.
So since you kind of touched on it, are you for the kind of election reform like ranked choice voting and proportional representation?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, I'm actually 100% for instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. I'm not a scholar on this issue, so I apologize if I'm getting these terms messed up. And I'm also very for proportional representation as well. I think that's really important. I think that right now, once again, you're seeing, because of the Democrats losing the last presidential election, all these Democratic states are saying, oh, it's time to do away with the Electoral College. It's time to do away with the Electoral College and go to the popular vote. Okay, well, the popular vote would be better than Electoral College, but why don't we actually take a look at other functional and thriving first world democracies, such as those in Europe or even in Canada. I mean, well, Canada doesn't have it, but a lot of European countries have proportional representation. A lot of them have instant runoff voting. Why don't we do a whole commission to actually look at this problem? Why are we just rushing to solve the problem per the one party that lost agenda? I just don't think that's really going to fix the issue at all. And then one day, 10 years down the road, they'll discover like, oh, proportional representation, the popular vote wasn't the best way to do this. We should probably come up with another system. I mean, I'm not for solving things tiny little incremental bits at a time. I'm for solving things quickly and efficiently and getting to the meat of the problem and making sure that we actually fix the issue. And if you want to fix our democratic institutions, we've got to make sure that that what we now call third parties, independent parties, have full funding as per every other country, pretty much. That you don't have to fight for ballot access every time. That we stay on the ballot for years and years and years. That we have taxpayer money fund our primaries, like the Democrats and Republicans have. I tell people this all the time. People are like, well, not even in the primary. I said, well, do you know that your tax dollars go to the Democrats and Republicans for their primary? Do you know that? And oftentimes, especially if they're independent, they're outraged. They said, I never thought of it like that. But that's exactly what it is. It's it's funding a private club to do their elections. And then we find out with the Bernie election that, Bernie in the primary, they don't even have to run those elections fairly, even though taxpayer dollars are being contributed towards those elections. I mean, I don't exaggerate when I say this. And I was just doing an interview yesterday with the independent outlet. We do not have a functional democracy. We just don't. We can vote. We can get involved politically. I encourage people to do that. But because of the elites insistent on a two-party state, in 2016, because of a hacking scandal, an email leak, the Democratic Party was, really dealt a devastating blow in that election, in my opinion. So now we have two parties, Democrats and Republicans. What if both of those parties had a devastating issue? The person that won the election was found to be doing something inappropriate, or there were pictures that came out, or this very nearly happened in 2016 with some of the stuff they were trying to release on Trump. So is that really choice? You have two parties, you've got possible scandals ripe in both of them, and you still have to go to the ballot box and choose? I mean, if we had a multi-party system, we could easily, with ranked choice voting, we could easily say, oh, well, sure, here's my safety candidate, number 5. Here's my first choice, number 1. But proportional representation would make that even better, and you make sure the folks, that would normally never get into Congress could easily get into Congress and have their voices heard. So, I mean, I think this is a real trying time for our country. I think we have to look at the authoritarian states, such as China, that we say that we don't want to emulate, and realize, are we going down that path? If the Republicans were in power as a one-party state for a little while, if the Democrats took over and had that same one-party rule, is that really better? I mean, are we really a functional democracy at that point? Is everyone going to hold hands and be in utopia? I don't think so.
So for the Green Party, election reform is part of the Green New Deal. Is there a difference between, or can you give me your perspective on the difference of the Green Party's Green New Deal and the Green New Deal that's being put out by others right now?
Election reform is barely in the resolution. That resolution is constantly being changed, and drafts are being leaked. I don't know if the leaks are intentional or not. So the resolution that's currently in Congress, I don't like to agree with its detractors, but I do think it's more of a wish list. I think even Congresswoman Cortez has said it'll be the first of many steps. So I don't feel like that current form could possibly lead to meaningful legislation. I think what you're going to see happen is this wish list will be voted on. It may, because it's non-binding, so it doesn't really matter if it gets the votes or doesn't. And then from there, you'll probably see an effort to do bit by bit little sections of it. So maybe you'll have a carbon, like a really small carbon tax with no dividend, or maybe you'll have like, money poured into a carbon offset program. And, and every single time one of those tiny little things happen, you'll see progressive Democrats come out and say, yay, this is because of our Green New Deal. Aren't we so great? And in reality, it's like, no, you're not, because your own central document actually says, if you don't do all of these things, we're doomed. So playing with carbon offsets, by your own admission, is not going to save us. But look, I gave a talk in Canada in 2018 to a basic income audience there. And, Canada is actively talking about a basic income. One of their territories actually went ahead and did it. And, it was amazing. A conservative government came in and canceled it. Now they're fighting to get it back. Really interesting stuff. They're way ahead of us. One of the things that one of their progressive leaders openly said, and this guy was a sitting senator in Canada's parliament. One of the things he said was, we have to stop incrementalism. Incrementalism is getting us nowhere, and the challenges that we face are too important to just throw incrementalist policy after policy at it. And I was just, my jaw hit the floor. I said something to him on the panel I was on. I said, I just cannot believe that this is the way that you all talk here in Canada, because even the most progressive and socialist, supposedly socialist folks in the Democratic Party, are saying stuff to the effect of, well, I'm a socialist, but we got to do things little by little, because we're never going to get the votes, we're never going to get the support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then nothing ever gets done. And then, they go home and say, oh yeah, I'm still a socialist, even though I did absolutely nothing when I was in office to show that. And, people just say, well, better than the Republicans, and they keep voting that way. And nothing ever really changes. So if our world is in crisis, and I would hope that if you're in the Green Party, you agree that our world is in crisis in a number of different fronts, it's time to take ourselves seriously and push that message out. That, incrementalist politics, maybe it would get someone elected, maybe it won't. It doesn't matter. The crises won't care if we get little tiny incremental policies done. The crises need to be fully addressed immediately. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. I want to give people a different vision for what someone running for president could look like, addressing the crises full stop, day one in office.
Excellent. So what immediate steps would you take to address climate change if you were elected president?
That's a great question. So I think, for us, I do things a little differently than I think you've seen from other declared politicians who are running for this office. One of the things that we're doing is we're trying to state clearly what the president can do immediately upon taking office. So the president is the commander in chief, as you know, and I think people don't realize how powerful that is. The president, he or she, has a unilateral authority over the military with very few restrictions. And in fact, one of the things you see right now is President Trump testing those restrictions when it comes to his supposed border wall. Can that be done under military authority? But military bases, military funding, the military industrial complex, what we do with our troops, how they're treated, what we do with our veterans, how they're treated, all of that falls under the authority of the presidency. Plus, on top of that, this enormous administrative bureaucracy with millions of buildings across the country, massive fleets of cars, massive amounts of personnel. So there are a number of things I think you could do day one in office. And some of the things we're looking at are, getting bids to equip every federal building with solar panels or wind. That's day one. Some of the other things we're looking at is letting people who are right now driving to work every single day be able to telecommute. That takes way less, environmental pollution, and also it would keep our roads less congested. We're also looking at things like enlarging the Peace Corps element of our military to allow for an army, something between a Peace Corps and an Army Corps of Engineer projects in the U.S. Something akin to the Green New Deal, but rather than go through the legislative process, which is going to take forever, we want to use the power of the military to say, if you join this branch, the Army Peace Corps, we call it, or the Peace Corps local, you will stay in the U.S. You'll be put to work helping make sure that our bridges, roads, pipes, internet lines, data cables, electrical lines that are all reinforced, that are all functional. I think you all have experienced this out there in California. The wildfires were absolutely terrible. Imagine if we had, a military service dedicated to, to not just dedicated to, because we kind of have that already, but guaranteed to be only deployed locally in their area, in their neighborhoods, where they live. They don't have to redo their whole life. They don't have to reset everything. They don't have to manage a big trip abroad and say goodbye to their families. They could actually get stuff done locally. I think you'd have people signing up in droves, and you could pay them a decent living wage. It's something that the military has the authority to decide on its own. And the military budget is so large, you could easily take troops home, shut down military bases abroad, or hand those military bases over to an agency like the UN, which has been proven to be more or less independent versus something like NATO. So I think there's a lot of different things that you could do at a national level. And I just, while we're on the topic too, I also want to just say this because I get a lot of questions about student debt. I think you could address student loan debt through the military as well. You could allow, if you're currently a member of the military, or if you join the military, even through one of these peaceful branches, that you could cancel all their student loan debt, or just have the government buy the student loan debt back from them at the end of the service. I mean, a lot of different countries out there have like 2 years of service, they call it, and you could either join the military or you could do something locally and be part of a civilian corps. And I remember reading about this when I was a kid and thinking that sounds terrible, but because I think there's that instant reaction, like, oh, that sounds like a bad idea. But I do think you could do it on a voluntary basis and make sure people know that, you could just stay home and serve your community locally for 2 years while you figure out your next career plan. Or maybe stay longer, and then you could be one of the lead engineers making sure your own city or town has, decent running water. I mean, we could fix the situation in Flint overnight if we had something like this. And I'm not the first person to say it. I mean, I think Dennis Kucinich talked about a Peace Corps back in the day, but I want to go a step further and make it a local corps focused on actually helping communities that need a really good size investment in their infrastructure, like in Baltimore.
Very interesting. I would love to see our Navy cleaning up the plastic pile that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, the military admits that's an emergency that they're keeping an eye on. Why aren't they doing something about it rather than just writing papers,
Right. So that makes a good transition to the next topic. How would you deal with foreign policy, American foreign policy?
Yeah. So as a socialist, I see foreign policy very differently than I think a lot of my capitalist peers. I think that a lot of the international tensions that you see today are because of our just insistent on a capitalist-only approach to foreign policy. So I'll just dive right into it, I guess. I think, if you look at what's going on with China today, I think if you look at that country as a socialist country, you recognize the fact that they don't care about things that traditional socialists value, such as patents. China just doesn't really care about that kind of intellectual property. So, I think in the US, there's a movement to do away with the patent system and to come with something that's more fair and equal. And you're not just seeing folks like the folks in the Pirate Party talk about this. You're seeing folks like Mark Cuban talk about this. Like, the patent system currently stops innovation in the U.S. It's a major problem. So then you have, folks like China who are trying to who have done the industrialization, and now they're going into the tech center, and they're just copying what they see. I mean, if you actually go to China, you'll see cars that look like they're the name brand cars, and they're actually generic versions of the same car because they've just ripped them off. And I think if you get into that socialist mindset, you kind of understand that it's about the product being delivered to your people, and it's not about the brand. It's not about that capitalist or GM making money. It's about your people getting the product. So I think that if we were to, I was sort of silent on this issue for a long time because I know that there is a populist idea out there to, kind of close our borders and, deal with trade through protectionism. But I think you're seeing that with President Trump. President Trump is clearly a protectionist, and I think that you're seeing the limits of the problem with that. So if we switched over to a socialist economy and got rid of our patent system, and then actually were able to bargain with China and say, if you're after intellectual property and we need your steel, let's come to an agreement here. I mean, there would be it would, I don't think it can be overstated how much trade and economics are at the core of international relations. I really think people need to get through that, because all we hear about in the U.S. is, let's focus on, we get into this weird tit for tat where, we'll denounce something that China does or something Saudi Arabia does, and then we'll have people in the U.S. say, well, they've done it. We've done stuff like that. Obama, killed U.S. citizens with drone strikes or something like that. And I think that the human rights aspect is really important, but I also think the economic aspect is equally as important, because I think that, you see it at play right now. I mean, you have President Trump say, well, I'm not going to stop trading with Saudi Arabia because they're going to buy military parts or, weapons. So, I mean, as a socialist, we could take that leverage completely out. We could completely remove that economic leverage. Why are we trading weapons at all? We should be saying, okay, we have nationalized, electric cars or nationalized solar panels. What do you want? What intellectual property can we give you? Can we work with you to help produce it? Can we make sure every city in the world, not even in our two countries, has enough solar and wind and renewable electricity to make sure that they're powered by it? Is it something place we could go? And because we are locked into this capitalist system, we can't really think like that. And we're forced to kind of, trade in some of the worst materials imaginable, which is weapons of war. I don't see things like that. I think we can, I also think if you had a socialist economy or anti-capitalist economy, that you could, we wouldn't have to be reliant on places like Saudi Arabia buying our weapons in order to save X amount of jobs. And if you had a basic income, the jobs would matter a little bit less, because we could say, well, no, we're going to shut this factory down because it would only make weapons of war. We'll open it back up again when we get, a contract for, I don't know, solar panels, or pipes or something like that. So our whole economy really has to be changed for the better. And I think that's the difference between me and a traditional, like progressive capitalist.
Interesting. So what do you think about what's happening in Venezuela right now?
Sure, that's a great question. Venezuela, for me, the short term and the simplest answer right now, especially with the Trump administration in charge, is that the U.S. should absolutely not be intervening in Venezuela at all. I mean, we have no right to intervene in Venezuela. That's clear as day to me. Our history in that region and internationally for regime change and for coups is disgusting. So, for me, it's really clear that other administrations in the past have tried, and the Trump administration has an opening to actually have a regime change in Venezuela. And I just, it can't be American-led. I don't think Maduro is as popular as people on the left tend to think he is. I just think that Juan Guaido is also probably less popular than Maduro. So this is a problem of confidence in elections, confidence in democracy. And I think that if the US would sort of move our role as the international police person to give that up and work more cooperatively with the UN, I think we'd see a much more harmonious world. You know, we have no right to say that we are the authority on well-run elections. That's laughable. We're not. But I think if you went to the UN and said, you know, okay, we'll give you money, we'll give you resources, you know, we'll send people your way if they want to volunteer and be part of your service and corps. And, you know, all we ask in exchange is that you take over as a true international body with representatives from every country, you know, who have a diverse set of ideas as the go-to agency for resolving conflicts internationally. And I think that, you know, if we had UN observers and international observers go into that country, and I know people have, and I know that, you know, they've said that the last election was fine. It was just the matter of the election being boycotted. Whose fault is that? Is it the opposition's? Is it the locals? Is it the regime in charge? And, you know, it's really important to kind of figure that out. So I don't think we have any right to say that. I think we have to just admit our history in the US and say our time has come to give this up and to delegate that responsibility to the UN. And I also think you could do that in terms of military as well. I know this seems sort of far out there, but I do really think that we've got to start to see that our imperialist agenda and, you know, pro-colonialist agenda is now going to try to be emulated by China or Russia. You know, we're going to have another arms race with them or worse. And it's time to just be the bigger person in the room. It's time to be the adult that we claim to be and hang up our hat and take organizations like the UN that have a proven track record of peacekeeping in very effective ways, in very non-confrontational ways, and say, we're going to hand over a large chunk of our military industrial, our military infrastructure to you, because we trust you to do this more than we trust ourselves. Because we're just one country of many. That could be an organization that could actually be truly representative of a democracy amongst countries. I think that there's precedence for this. Like, I think the EU has something similar to this. But I also think that if we do it through the UN rather than through any of the other like pro-capitalist agencies out there, like the IMF or the World Bank, you know, if we actually do it through an agency that is founded on human rights principles and spreading them, and then hang our hat up and stop being this exceptionalist voice in the UN for, you know, you know, I mean, if you look at what happened with the UN this last round to Venezuela, I mean, we're the ones saying, let's go through the regime change. Other countries are saying, no, let's go through with the aid. And we're not just hanging up our hat and saying, you know, let's just let other countries that have a better insight into this work it out. And then I think we could be that example for Russia and China, and they'll do the same. And then regional authority will actually kind of take over and say, okay, well, here's actually what's best for the people. Maybe we'll schedule another election, maybe we won't, but let them figure that out. I just don't think the US has any kind of interventionist role anymore. And in fact, our role needs to be to show that we've moved on, and we expect other countries like China and Russia to move on as well.
Yeah, very interesting perspective. And so do you think Trump is right talking to North Korea's leadership?
I mean, that whole scenario is it's a camera-ready opportunity for both of those regimes. I don't really feel like either party, the US or North Korea, was actually going to make significant change one way or another. I think that some of the things that we were like willing to negotiate on are just ludicrous. For example, you know, negotiating on formally ending the North Korean war. Like that shouldn't be on the table. We should sign that tomorrow. I guess that's something that I would do if I was elected. I would easily sign that document that said, yep, yeah, this has been over for a long time. Let's all move on. You know, I do think that I also think that the US should not be playing some sort of proxy war or proxy sanction system through North Korea to China. I also feel like that's another example where we lose all legitimacy when we directly intervene with our own sanctions and then our own, showy statements about, international conferences with them where nothing really gets accomplished. I just feel like if we were serious in this arena, this is another area where we would hang up our hat and say, we failed. We have failed to protect that area. We put a military base in South Korea. No one can really afford it. We're fighting over who can afford the military base. Let's just hand this over to the UN and start over. And I really do see that we need to create a new age where we are not looking at a Pax Americana. That means an international peace based on U.S. military force. We're looking at a Pax UN, a United Nations Pax, where I think that we vest military interest in the UN or a similar, well-respected agency that has true democratic representation of all countries. And then we are finally able to reduce our own military spending, give a clear, strong footing to a true neutral body that I think could be internationally respected. Because when we do sanctions now, it's kind of seen like, oh, the U.S. is just trying to get something out of that country, or the U.S. is playing some sort of proxy game, or the CIA is involved with some sort of long-term plan for regime change. I mean, it's one thing after another, and I just don't think our reputation is going to recover unless we put a good faith effort into just demilitarize ourselves and move that military force to an agency that's seen as independent.
Excellent. And so last question on foreign policy. How about the is Israel-Palestine relationship? How
Sure.
can we handle that?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. Yeah. So I am ethnically and racially Jewish. I don't practice Judaism. I was raised a different religion. But I get this question a lot, and I sort of, I don't like going into identity politics, but I think this week with what happened to Congresswoman Omar and her attempts to be censured, I needed to speak out. And one of the things that I did say was, when you are someone that is racially Jewish, you do get people coming up to you that assume that you're pro-Israel, and pro-Israeli Defense Force, pro the occupation of Palestine, and pro-apartheid. And they obviously don't see it this way, but I've been asked by quite a few people, oh, people just throw money at you because you're obviously pro-Israel because you're Jewish. Just come out to these parties, meet these donors, get involved with this clique. And it's disgusting. It revolts me as a person that loves peace, as a person that doesn't want to see these atrocities committed, and as a Jewish American. I really feel that painting everyone into a corner of being either anti-Semitic or pro-Israel is disgusting. There are thousands, maybe millions of Jewish Americans and Jewish people worldwide that obviously think what Israel is doing is completely wrong. There's tons of peace groups that are focused on Israel and Judaism, and none of them are saying that oh yeah, pro-peace is obviously what Israel is doing right now. And I also think it's completely ridiculous to say that here in the U.S., the Trump administration is obviously a problem, obviously doing terrible things, but the Netanyahu administration in Israel, because they're part of Israel or because they're Jewish, can't be criticized. I mean, that's just totally insane. Some of these comments that I watch a lot of foreign television, like I watch a lot of French TV, I guess you could say, because everyone feels like everyone's got a propaganda station up. If you actually look at the statements that are not being covered in the U.S. media by the Netanyahu government, I mean, they made this horribly offensive comment about Poland recently, just unbelievably offensive about Poland's participation or lack of participation in World War II. I mean, it's just I just can't understand what that Netanyahu administration is thinking, and I also cannot understand how anyone can defend that administration. They're under indictment, similar to President Trump. I mean, to defend the Netanyahu administration is just, I don't understand what kind of person could do that at this point. So I hope and I pray that the people of Israel elect a new sane government that has a completely different point of view when it comes to the treatment of people in Palestine. Because right now, I mean, I'm on record as saying that what Israel is doing to Palestine is akin to apartheid, maybe even worse because of all the deaths we're seeing. And the complete overreaction and the use of force is internationally illegal. I mean, we have to recognize that. You can't say to someone that flying a kite that could have a bomb is equivalent to the reaction that Israel has, which is to just shoot protesters on sight. I mean, that's just completely ridiculous. I think we have to take a real rational look at that situation. In the short term, that issue could be solved very quickly with people that would just take a look at what Congresswoman Omar's statements are and realize that they're the truth, that they are the truth. Why is there a pro-Israel lobby full with millions of dollars out there trying to cover for the Netanyahu administration? That seems to be very problematic, and we've got to tackle it head on. And, you know, quite frankly, this whole issue has really riled me up because I've been attacked for thinking, you know, people don't call me anti-Semitic. Thankfully, they have a half a brain and can realize that I'm Jewish, and that doesn't make any sense. But, they just continuously equate Israel with with all Jewish people, and that's just a total fiction. I think we've got to separate that outright. We can't let them do that in America either. We can't let them say, oh, if you attract President Trump, you know, you're anti-American. Like, that's just nonsense. We have to constantly be critiquing ourselves and improving ourselves. So, you know, that's sort of my 2 cents on that. Before we move on from foreign policy, can I just make one more addition?
Sure.
Yeah. I just want to also say that, you know, I think that you're looking at there has been a lot of talk recently about weaponizing space. And I think that that's a really important topic that can guide a lot of what I've been talking about. Because I've been mentioning really big and bold ideas about demilitarizing the US and then handing that over to an international authority like the UN. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that if we don't, we're going to see our Space Force versus China's Space Force versus Russia's Space Force having like ridiculous space battles. They're already doing this in the virtual world, in the online world, you know, attacking each other, hacking each other, trying to figure out who's a state actor, who's not. I mean, we've got to just declare this over and just say offensive force and defensive measures have to be handled at the international level and just kind of move on from there. Because we're one planet at the end of the day. We can't be weaponizing space. I just absolutely cannot do it. And I don't think the U.S. has really, you know, we've had supposedly, left-leaning Democratic administrations that have not adhered to the principles of once and for all, you know, stating that we're not going to weaponize space. And now you have Trump come along and say, we're creating a space force, hooray, you know, and all pro-U.S. military folks kind of going along with it. So I think we've got to have a president that has enough guts to say, no, we are taking a stance once and for all. We're not going to develop a space force. We're going to help the UN develop something that sets a clear framework on how the space is going to be non-military and not used in that front. I mean, think about if there was an asteroid about to hit the Earth tomorrow. I don't think that rival countries could independently have a shot of shooting out of the sky. That obviously would take an international effort, and that's what we need to start thinking about as one planet.
Excellent. I wanted to move on to a topic that's very interesting to me. I saw that you are for a new investigation agency for police. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really simple one. I'm not sure why more people don't think about this platform. So, you know, you've got the FBI, which will once in a while, through complaints, create consent decrees like we have in Baltimore. And basically the situation gets so bad, you know, police have killed so many poor unarmed individuals. 9 times out of 10, they're people of color. 9.9 times out of 10, they're Black individuals. Or there's just random beatings. Police officers are just not trusted. And the police are found in law to be corrupt. People don't know about that as well. There's a gun violence task force in Baltimore that has just been getting charge after charge after charge of all different officers that have been found in a criminal racket, like a gangster type racket, stealing guns, selling illegal drugs. I mean, it's everything that you hear the right wing criticize poor people of color for doing, or other countries like Mexico for doing to the U.S. And it's happening with our own police officers right here in Baltimore City. And it's all on record. It's all fact. It gets very little media attention. So I think we need an agency that takes the initiative, that they frequently go into police departments around the country and audit them hard, and talk to local community leaders and have a dialogue with them and say, if you see any kind of nonsense in your neighborhood from police, come to us immediately. And they have the authority to disband whole police agencies, or maybe just 1 or 2 jurisdictions of police. They can prosecute them, they could hire them, they could fire them. I just think you need more oversight of police in general. I mean, I've gone so far when I was running in Baltimore City to say that not just a civilian review board with indictment power, but also a civilian review board with hiring and firing power. Because there's a lot of times police are just not going to take that chance and out themselves or their partners. They're going to stick up for that partner to the very end, even if that guy or woman is completely corrupt. So it's really important to have an agency that could just say, look, we work with the community leaders. Community leaders are on our panel. They're working with us. They're telling us this officer is doing inappropriate things, and they've got to go. They got to be fired. They got to be moved. They have to find another line of work. Being a police officer, I know it's a calling for some people. I know that it is a very difficult job, but there are other jobs out there. And if you can't handle the responsibility of being a police officer, and your own community doesn't like you, that you're there to protect and serve, it's time to find another line of work. And so I have no problem telling the Justice Department to create a new agency that would specifically focus on just investigating and having that relationship with communities to keep track of police. We don't even have a clear record right now of how many police have shot and killed in individuals, because that's just something that the U.S. doesn't really keep track of. So an agency like this it's beyond time to take care of it, do it.
Right. I like that you said that they would have prosecution power, because oftentimes I think the district attorney is working with the police every day and is hesitant to prosecute as well.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's such a messed up relationship between the DA's office and the police department, because the district attorney relies on the police to do their investigations for them 9 times out of 10 when they're prosecuting someone that we put away for life. So to then all of a sudden turn around one day and try to take out a high-ranking police officer who's been known to be corrupt, and maybe that person has people under them. Maybe that person's not going anywhere. The police union will back that person. There's major problems that come from this system right now. So we've got to separate these two systems out. We've got to take that authority and give it to another agency, because it's just, you look at, I think Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore City has been getting a lot of press. She's our state's attorney in Baltimore City. And because she's decided that she's not going to prosecute marijuana crime anymore. Well, Marilyn Mosby probably can't prosecute marijuana crime anymore, because when she went after the police officers who were involved in Freddie Gray, she pretty much severed all ties with them. She cannot get a prosecution at all anymore. And it's driving everyone in Baltimore City crazy, because there are some serious offenders out there that are in need of intervention. A lot of times they're juveniles, and to just not be able to get any sort of movement in the court system is really causing a lot of chaos in Baltimore. And on the other hand, I will take a second to mention this case. Keith Davis is this individual in Baltimore City who he was charged for handgun crime. He had the case thrown out. And then rather than just let the case lie, the state's attorney was personally insulted by Keith Davis's fiance or wife, I believe. And because of this personal insult, she decided to keep the case going and has prosecuted this individual, I think it's something like 9 times. Every single time the case gets thrown out due to improper evidence or improper handling, something like that. And she just continues to go over and over and over again. And I believe he's been in jail now for about 3 years, just sitting there. And he hasn't been found guilty, has not been found guilty. And there's no chance of him getting out anytime soon because of the malicious actions of Miss Mosby. So, I mean, the state's attorney role and the DA's office has really become one where it's been highly politicized. You know, we applaud when we see a news headline we like, and we don't learn about these cases that sit there from behind the scenes or their relationship with the cops. And I think that we've got to completely depoliticize that, put that into an agency at the top that can handle this and move some things around and get resources where they need to go, and also make some prosecutions outside of the DA's office, because this system just does not work. I mean, you come to Baltimore if you want to get more examples of this. We've got tons of them here.
Excellent. So, like I said, this topic really interests me. Would you expand this independent investigation agency to, for instance, politicians? Like for me, George Bush should be prosecuted for war crimes because there were no weapons of mass destruction. If not war crimes, I think treason for taking us into a war under false pretenses. Also, would you take it to the level of corporations, like during the banking collapse, the fraud that was committed, that we could prosecute actual executives in corporations? The wealthy seem to be untouchable. Could this independent investigation agency be expanded to those areas?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question, because it's one of the things that really differentiates me, I think, especially from a lot of the Democrats that are running. After President Obama was elected, there were questions of whether or not the Bush administration would be charged for war crimes. And he famously said, well, let's let the past be in the past. Let's move on, something like that. So I think that it's really important to, and I'm glad you asked me, but I want to see every single candidate running for president to be asked, do you feel it's important to try, previous high-ranking officials and administrations that did wrong? And, we're talking about the Bush administration, but we're also talking about the Obama administration for killing civilians abroad with drone strikes, as we just heard from a recently uncovered statement by Congresswoman Omar. And we also need to be thinking about the Trump administration with their recent actions of separating children and families at the border. I mean, that's just with no plan to put them back together, which is just negligence to a degree that is malicious, absolutely horrifying behavior. So, I mean, if we're not seriously going to talk about undoing the harms of the past, I don't really think you have any real business being in the ring for presidency. I'm just going to say that outright. So I think it's a really important question, and I want to see people ask this all across the country, no matter what party you're in. Obviously, I think I would look into making sure the Justice Department has what it needs to go after those people. I do think, despite a lot of what you're hearing now from the Democratic Party, that the president sets the tone for what the priorities are. So, for example, I think the housing crisis is a good example of this. There was going to be more investigation into the white collar nature of shorting the housing market. And then, the directive kind of came about terrorism. And we saw the FBI and other agencies just move their focus right over to terrorist related activity. You actually see the same thing in Baltimore with a lot of the funding priorities here because of the ports we have and stuff like that. So it's really important to me to make sure that we have equal representation of different things being investigated in the Justice Department. And on top of that, we also have to make it really clear that we're undoing decades of classist and racist policies from the Justice Department. I mean, if you don't have top-notch lawyers, and you a billionaire level money, you're not going to be able to hire the best people to defend you and get you out of being prosecuted or even out of your court case. So it's really important that we tell the Justice Department that they have to take a far more balanced approach. And I would go as far as to say that they should create a new agency. I do think there are a lot of folks in the FBI who are working on white collar cases that I'm sure would love to just get the backing of the administration to say that let's finish off these investigations and not kill them halfway or be pressured to move on them so quickly. But if that doesn't work, I think that creating an agency specifically for white collar crimes would make a lot of sense, especially because white collar crimes are very difficult and very different to prosecute than I think what we're typically seeing being prosecuted right now. I also want to say, I don't know if you're going to ask about this later, but I'll just say it now. I consider myself a prison abolitionist. I don't believe that people should be sent to prison for life. Prison is punitive. It's not reformative. There's no sense that you're going to get out of there and be a better person. And I think that we're very hesitant to use our economic powers in this country to do what's right for the people. So, I mean, for example, if we sent a blue-collar criminal to prison, why are they them leaving with their millionaire fortune, and not having it completely stripped away from them, having to start their life over, is totally different than taking a young person of color, locking them up for life, letting them out in their middle age, and then watching them, flounder now trying to find a job with a record. I mean, it's completely insane. We see the exact same approach when it comes to marijuana reform. So many states now are saying, let's legalize marijuana. But what they're not saying is the fact that, well, okay, what are you doing with the people that are in prison right now? A lot of them, for distributing large quantities of marijuana, who are never going to be, and then you're saying that here in Maryland we have this problem. The folks that are getting the licenses to sell them are all high-priced lawyers, or millionaires that can afford high-priced lawyers because they know the system, they know how to work it. Well, why aren't we saying to those that were in prison for years selling large quantities of marijuana, hey, guess what? It's legal now. You're out, your record's expunged, and you're the first one able to sell it. Congratulations. I mean, that's the way I would do it. And I can't understand the system that's so backwards that we just have to once again make marijuana, decriminalizing marijuana, which is a victory in all, in everyone's eyes, pretty much. Now, again, a punitive act against people of color that have been sitting in prison for decades. So I really feel that we've got to rethink the way we look at criminal justice in its entirety. And resources are just not being evenly spent at all. And, creating an agency for white collar would be one of the many things that I would do. I would definitely take a hard look at drug offenders as well and, work on putting them into programs that would be far better. The war on drugs has been a complete failure. We've got to get back into a state of making sure people can recover from that and move on with their lives. We're just not looking at that right now. We're looking at putting people in prison the second they make that leap from here in Maryland, we've got giant billboards that say, if you see an overdose, don't run away, call the cops. And, I had to take a second and think, well, because if you see an overdose and you're near someone getting an overdose, you could be hauled away. Someone could say, this person has a certain quantity of drugs on them. You're probably their dealer. You were there near the drugs. What are you going to do? Tell us you weren't? You're going to prison. I mean, the system we have just makes no sense from a wellness and health perspective. We're not really reforming people and getting them the treatment that they need. So I think criminal justice in general has to be completely redone. And I would start at the top, especially prosecuting those white collar folks. I think that they get away with way too much. And, we could easily see an organization focused on them.
I really like that you said you're a prison abolitionist. At the same time, you want to prosecute people at all levels of socioeconomic status. They seem like they're two conflicting ideas, but I don't think they are. It's just basically equal justice, restorative justice. I like your position there.
Thanks.
I assume that you're against private prisons as well.
Private prisons are just this outcrop of how far down the rabbit hole of capitalism and locking people up that we've come. There's this perfect marriage of people that want to make a ton of money, off the backs of working class folks, people that are just trying to get by, and people of color. And I think it's so obvious that private prisons are wrong. I cannot understand why people are still for them. Whole towns in our capitalist state, whole towns have to, celebrate when a private prison is created, and then pray for more convictions or work with the cops to get more convictions to fill it. It's nightmarish. I mean, this is like dystopian level stuff here. I mean, this should be obvious. We should be hearing from the top, from the presidency themselves, that this is a terrible situation. Private prisons need to be abolished, made illegal. They should not be allowed. Full stop. Prison labor itself should be paid minimum wage, of course, as long with tip workers as well. Those aren't even people that we really consider people at this point, because we kind of give them a lesser wage than everyone else. So I think there's so many avenues to go down this road. And I also think that if you take someone that's selling illegal substances who has almost no money, and pull them into prison and give them, I'm saying this is what our current system does. So they pull them into prison, and rather than say to them, let's help you get a job when you get out of prison so you don't have to do this anymore, and let them make that choice, or make sure they have a basic income so they don't feel like they have to do this again just to get by. We have people in Baltimore that are elderly with canes and enormous like they lean over in their canes. They have enormous back problems. I don't know how else to phrase it. That are literally selling drugs. I mean, it's unbelievably bad. And they wouldn't be if they had a basic income. They wouldn't be if they had a job. They wouldn't be if they had other means to take care of themselves and their families. Nobody wants this lifestyle. But I think that when the system that we currently have could be used to intervene in families and individuals that are in crisis and help them get their life turned around, not just from the opioid or the war on drugs standpoint, but also from the just economic standpoint. But when you take someone who's a millionaire or a billionaire and doing terribly illegal things to keep their money or to give themselves a private island, or that's a different story. I mean, we should be looking at taking their what they made, first of all, from illegal money has to be taken away immediately. Like, I don't think anyone disagrees on that. I would go a step further and say maybe the state should take away more. Maybe the state should try to, help them understand that they are, profiting off of people's misery is always wrong. And right now, as a society, as our economics tell us, we don't really have that view. We don't really say that's always wrong. So I think there is an avenue here to not just lock people up for life, but to take away their ill-gotten goods. You build a private prison on the backs of suffering. I think, I don't want to get too revolutionary, but I think the first thing a socialist revolution would do would be to take those people's houses, boats, cars away, and tear those prisons down. Because I don't think there's anything more a big enough affront to just a sense of human justice that we see in the world than private prisons and our attempt to try to fill them. It's disgusting. Right.
That's great. What about the black markets? We touched on the drug market, prostitution, or immigration, illegal immigration. How do we handle the prohibition of all of these things?
Wow, that's a great question. So a lot of these I would handle one by one, and I'll just try to briefly go through each of these. Prostitution, I have been on record through the Green Party as saying that prostitution should be legalized. At minimum, it should be decriminalized. The Green Party's platform does call for decriminalization at some level. I would want to make sure that it's decriminalized or legalized to the point where the sex workers can keep themselves safe. That's my number one concern. So, you know, right now there's a lot of talk of if you if you were to house a sex worker and you know that they're sex working in your house, you could be charged as a pimp. So, you know, if you're doing a kindness to someone by saying you can live here, you don't have to sleep on the streets, and I know you're a prostitute, I know you're going to make your money this way, you know, there should be a way to help those people that doesn't make you a criminal. That's insane to me. And you take that aspect and you can go really far, because you could say things like an app. Like, there have been attempts to have sex workers make their own apps that like write up reports on Johns that have tried to sexually assault them or beat them or kill them. And, you know, the second I author an app like that, I'm a pimp, I'm a criminal, and I'll be hauled to jail. I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely nuts. So we really got to rethink this completely. You know, sex working is the oldest profession. I do not think that we have a realistic ability in our lifetime to stop sex working. You really want to stop sex working, give a basic income first, and then, you know, maybe we could talk about it. But I don't see that as realistic at all. And I trust the sex workers who tell me that they want decriminalization to the point where they can be safe. That's what they're asking for. That's what we should give them. I think, you know, the war on drugs is really obvious to me. It's a lot of people that are just desperate, and this is the most amount of money they can make in the shortest amount of time. I mean, you know, it's folks that have made the economic decision that I can't not pay my rent, I can't not let my family go hungry, I must do something. I'm going to get on the corner and I'm going to sell, and, you know, I'll just run from the cops and see what happens. Better than doing nothing and watch your family become homeless. So I think that this is a really nightmare scenario that we've allowed ourselves to get into, because we don't do the basic human rights view. We don't have an economic system that's based on human rights like a socialist system would be. We have one that's based on raw capitalism. You can't have enough money to pay your rent gets increased, you're out on the street. That's terrible. I mean, we've got to make sure that there's methods to make sure people can stay housed, be it public housing. I'm for massively increasing public housing. I'm for making sure that housing market's stable. Maybe that involves rent control. Maybe it involves something more drastic than rent control. But I just want to get to the bottom of it and make sure that we have a stable housing market that's not out of control. I do think that there are certain black market activities, such as like organ harvesting, that are just blatantly illegal. Like, if you're participating in organ harvesting, I would hope you're not just someone insane and you're doing this for money, and then, you know, anything you would possibly make on that should be instantly, you know, forfeited, returned. And I could definitely see, you know, something like that being imprisoned. You know, like that's something where I'm a prison abolitionist, but either that person's needs serious mental health and mental help because they're not well to be doing something like that, or their economic situation needs to be examined. And that might be an act that has to be punitive. So I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that we can move into a utopia tomorrow. I do acknowledge that there's black market activities that I think are going to be around to stay for a little bit. But I do think we can alleviate some of the biggest suffering out there, because we have to just admit that a lot of folks are just trying to get by. Like, they don't want to be doing this. They have to be doing this. And so basic income guarantee, universal housing, you know, we talk about universal health care. We don't hit on the fact that universal health care is something you're going to talk about later, or should I talk about it now?
Oh, no, go ahead. Let's talk about it. Sure.
Sure. Universal health care is one of those things where we're talking about taking the profit motive out of that. We're talking about saying that insurance companies can no longer make money off of this. You know, either they have to go find something else to do, or they have to go out of business. Why don't we go further? Why don't we say universal housing? Why don't we say universal clothing? Why don't we say universal food? You know, food scarcity is a major issue in America. We waste lots and lots of food each day. And I'm not saying everything has to be turned over to the government in some weird nationalist system. I'm just saying, do we really need to be making a profit? You know, it's so important to define these terms. This is why I'm a socialist, because I like how socialists really do the work and they define these terms. Should the person picking food off the vine be compensated? Absolutely. Should the farmer be compensated? Absolutely. Should the trucker be compensated? Absolutely. Should the supermarket workers be compensated? Absolutely. But do we need a massive global international company picking a profit off of everyone's back in that system to the point where food prices go sky high. No, we don't need that. So, that's the whole appeal of a universal medical care, such as, Medicare for all. Doctors get paid, nurses get paid, hospitals even get paid. If you're some big giant company trying to gouge people, you're not going to get paid. And so you should take that attitude, that mindset, and look at what other industries we could do this to. Food, shelter, internet services, maybe. I mean, if you need it to live, if you can't live without it, if you couldn't have a decent life, there should be a way for you to get access to it. That's not just through charity, because charity is something where, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. It depends on a rich person's willing to donate to the charity. It should be a guaranteed thing from the government. And this is what I mean when I talk about socialism or a human rights-based economy. It's a completely different, it is anti-capitalism. It's putting the needs of people first before the needs of capitalists. So this is a big deal for me. And this is, I think, something that distinguishes me from other folks running, because this is the way that I see the world. And I want to make sure this message is out there for everyone else to demand and organize with.
Excellent. That's very impressive. Lastly, you didn't talk about immigration. How about immigration reform? What would you do?
That's a great question. So immigration is, look, we have universal treaties and conventions, internationally signed accords that state clear as day that if you have asylum seekers or refugees coming to your country, you must open the door. You must give them a chance to explain themselves. You must give them a decent level of existence while they're waiting. They have basic human rights. And to see all these countries, not just the US, but also in Europe, say, oh, well, we just don't want to abide by this. We don't like these other people. We don't know where they are. They have different customs, different cultures. It's just too bad. We all agree to live by these rules. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with climate change. Maybe the entire eastern seaboard needs to be evacuated. Where are those people going to go? So, I mean, it's really important that we maintain these international standards and don't let dictators and authoritarians and right-wingers like Trump and some of the ones we're seeing in Europe manipulate them and train them and water them down. We have a fundamental obligation. If someone comes to our borders and says, I am in danger if I stay in my home country, please let me in, to open the door. And these people should be treated with respect. They should be make sure they have enough money to live and to eat and to have a decent existence. I think where I'm a little bit different on this issue is that I don't see a reason to give them a court date. So that is their legal obligation right now, is that they would have a court date, a judge would review their case. I've sat in offices of centers, that are immigration centers, that are helping immigrants, come to the U.S. And one of the things they do is they ask for newspaper clippings and articles and letters from their hometown, showing that they are, under attack. Like, my village was firebombed. The local mercenaries are after me. I'm gay and my partner was shot and killed in front of my face. They need documentation. They bring that documentation to the court, and the court makes a decision. I would actually think that our immigration court is extremely backlogged. And it's something that Trump actually talks about, which I find really interesting. Like, he's almost trying to intentionally backlog it because he feels that people just shouldn't be allowed in the country. So I think if a Democrat came in, they probably would just fill the immigration court and things would kind of get back to normal. I actually have a different point of view. I think that everyone who comes to the border should be believed. I mean, I really don't understand why they wouldn't. If I go into Canada, I show my passport, I drive over the border, and I hang out there. I mean, I do what I need to do. I go to a conference, I live my life. I go on vacation, I do whatever I need to do. If I do something illegal, if I start punching people on the street, then I should be arrested. And if I'm not a Canadian citizen, then I might be deported. That's kind of the simplicity of the process. Why don't we do that with every person that comes into the US? I just don't understand. I think our border enforcement policy is not one that's sustainable. I don't think that we can, I think refugee crises are only going to get worse with climate change. I think what's happening in Venezuela, we might start seeing a lot more Venezuelans come into the country too. So I also, I just feel like it's not sustainable to just keep throwing courts at them and saying more judges and more judges, evaluating and evaluating. I think it would just be more fair to allow them the privilege that I have as a white person going into Canada. I go to the border, I go over the border, no one says anything to me. I'm not pulled over, and maybe they'll inspect my car. Yeah, that's fine. You can inspect my car and what I have on me and my valuables. I mean, you don't want me to bring something illegal into your country. But other than that, I don't understand this level of prosecution that exists for someone just trying to get into a country. I think we have to admit that internationally we have a right of freedom of movement, and we have to be able to move where we want to move and live where we want to live. And if that upsets you, I think we have to look at how we have to kind of create international standards of living. We shouldn't have people in developing countries living on less than $1 a day or $10 a day. We should make sure stuff is universally accessible internationally, not just here. And this is why I find what's going on in Africa and in China to be a particular concern, because you've got really large populations that have become industrialized or are industrializing, and they're looking at the U.S. as that model. If you ever talk to a recent, most recent African immigrants, they love the U.S., they love America, they love the wealth, they love the cars, they love the electricity and the food, and if we continue down this path of, become middle class, get a big house, 2 cars, 3 cars, maybe all your kids have cars, have ostentatious wealth, swimming pools and stuff like that. That's not a sustainable model for, the billions of people on this planet. And, eventually they're all going to rise up and want that in one way or another. And I just feel like we have in the U.S. a special responsibility to show a path that makes sense from an economic and from a climate change standpoint. We can't be spending, we're what, 5% of the world's population? We can't be spending, so much of the world's energy consumption or the material consumption. We've got to make a plan. We need a president that's going to make a plan to say things need to be more equal on our planet. And here's the kicker. Even if you disagree with me, even if you think Americans should be exceptional and everyone should strive to be middle class. I hate the word middle class, by the way. I never use it. I don't appeal to the middle class. I want to make sure that people that are poor and working class feel like this campaign's for them. Because anyone can be poor and middle class. It just takes 1 or 2 paychecks, and basically you're not middle class anymore. You're poor. But anyway, I think that it's time to say that, everyone in this country should have a good standard of living, no matter what class you are, no matter how much money you make. And then that should be the example that we set internationally. And that's the kind of thing we could then say to China and then to Africa, look at our new standard. Everyone has enough, everyone gets along. There's no ostentatiously wealthy people eating up all the resources. And let's all strive for that together internationally. That's my vision. That's why I'm running for president. I know I declared my candidacy when I was 33 and now 34. I know I'm very young to be doing this, but I really want to make sure that this vision is one that's out there, because I don't think that we should just be striving for a democratic style socialism. I think we should be striving for true anti-capitalism. Like, we cannot let capital run our society. We are people that are smart and sophisticated and creative, and we can come up with new innovative ways to run the world that don't just rely on the almighty dollar calling all the shots. So that's my answer to that.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a good place to end this interview. Let me ask you this before we go. Are there any websites or organizations that you want to promote? I can integrate them into the video.
Sure. Yeah. My website is schlakman.com. So it's my last name, just SCHLAKMAN.com. And I'm actually not on Facebook that often. I probably post the least there. I'm on Instagram and Twitter quite a bit. So it's just Schlakman at Twitter, or I think it's Ian Schlakman on Instagram, but it's on the website if you want to just double check it.
Sure.
I mean, the website has some policy proposals. We have a preview policy that's already up on the website. It's not complete. And one of the things we're going to be doing is creating a interactive policy where people can actually pitch policy ideas and stuff like that. I'm a tech person, so we're working on that right now. You know, and the only thing I wanted to mention was just, oh, can I just mention one more thing? Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, I also feel very strongly that barring some kind of international or national crises with the two major parties, the Green Party is probably not going to win the presidential election, but we are going to get on television. We are going to get on mainstream television. They're probably going to put us on there to insult us. And our job as the presidential candidate needs to be to focus on down ticket Greens that have winnable races. That is something that I would do. You know, I would make, on Twitter, I'm constantly retweeting folks that are running down ticket, trying to make sure they get some attention and some dollars, because that's where our party needs to focus and grow. That's what I've been doing in Baltimore, you know, going into public housing communities, rural and urban, and talking to them, making sure they feel like they have a political party. And, you know, we've had people that were formerly selling dope, you know, now out there voting for me, you know, getting their lives turned around. I mean, this is really inspirational stuff that we're doing in Baltimore. And I want to take that and make that the national way the Green Party grows. Growing from the ground up, getting local victories, getting statewide victories, and then onward to Congress. That's what we need to be.
Excellent. So what you said about we're probably not going to get elected, but we will get our voice out there, which was shown with the Green New Deal, also with the election reform changes that Jill Stein was able to make. And it's very important that, that, like you said, we're out there and running. And I appreciate you for running. And
thank you
for doing this interview.
Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a really fun interview. I really appreciate it. My first video interview. I've done several audio, but not my first video one. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks for talking to us, and good luck.
Anytime. Thanks again.